So the word on the street right now is that Donald Trump has narrowed down his vice presidential search to just 4 to 5 candidates.
Shing, 5 candidates.
Now, what's so absolutely fascinating about this is the fact that although it seems that they actually know who their person is, they're not going to be releasing the name until the RNC, which is coming up in Cleveland.
I think that's a big mistake.
Now, his aides and insiders are very, very worried that Donald Trump is going to go ahead and randomly tweet out the name of his vice president at any given time. They're very concerned about this.
I would be too. I mean, he's a Twitter maniac.
I mean, he is. He is a Twitter maniac. Now, Richard, I want to dive deep and talk with you about who you think Donald Trump's choices for vice presidential nominee are. 1, who do you think he's going to pick? 2, who would be the correct person to pick to win?
Ooh.
Because I don't think those are the same things.
Ooh, who's he going to pick? He needs to pick.
I mean, let's evaluate what Trump needs in a vice president.
So who he needs to pick is John Kasich. John Kasich won't accept it.
I don't think so either.
But that's who he needs to pick. He needs to pick John Kasich.
Now, I think John Kasich really does check all of the boxes that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, he wants a Washington insider, somebody that could guarantee him a state.
100%.
Somebody that could help him in the rest.
And we're talking about guaranteeing him an important state, too.
Yeah, Ohio, right? It's a state he doesn't already have. But somebody who can guarantee him a sense of normalcy. Like, that will make him not look so crazy, or so dangerous is the better word.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is exactly right. I mean, I think that there is a lot of science to selecting your vice presidential candidate. Generally, you want to pick someone who is almost a foil to your presidential candidate. So between the two of them, you try to bring in as large of a coalition of voters as possible. I think we've seen it done incredibly successfully in some cases in the last couple of decades. We've also seen some failures. A perfect example, the quintessential failure would be Sarah Palin. Right, Richard, I don't even need to say it because we already know the answer.
Well, the other quintessential failure would have been Joe Lieberman.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
It should have been,
too.
I mean, in the Joe Lieberman, Al Gore should have picked Bob Graham. The current at that time was a sitting senator in Florida, which Joe Lieberman got him nothing.
Well, that's the problem, right?
Joe Lieberman got him nothing.
The vice president is a value add.
The same guy who was the vice president 8 years later, then spoke at the Republican convention.
Yeah, that's a traitor right there.
That's what I call a traitor. Now he's a political nobody. But he should have picked Bob Graham. But Sarah Palin was the worst pick. Was a candidate.
She was the
more worse.
Yeah, she was terrible.
That's not even a grammatical word.
Of course it's not. So here we are. Trump is on the brink of announcing his vice presidential nominee. We have identified what the criteria for a good pick will be. Someone that can bring him a state, someone that broadens his appeal, someone that's a Washington insider, maybe makes Trump seem a little less crazy.
Correct.
And okay, so I really don't think Kasich is going to be willing to do it. No. He seems like a man with principles.
And even if Kasich does
for a politician,
the ad I would cut if Kasich did it was him in the Jake Tapper interview. I think it's the Jake Tapper interview, or is it the Chris Cuomo interview, where he says, "I can't support Donald Trump because of my wife and my daughters, and I don't like what he says. I don't like what he stands for. I think he's an embarrassment. I don't let my daughters watch him." That will be the commercial I'll run over and over again on loop in Ohio. I'd run it like this.
Well, I mean, and that's also the problem. You have a lot of people who are now very viable vice presidential candidates who have said some really damning things about Donald Trump on the record in the primary season.
Who are possible candidates?
I mean, for me, I'll give you guys, so the Washington Post prepared a pretty nice list of possible candidates. I'm going to go over some of them. They fall into two categories. You have your Washington insiders and your outsiders/Tea Partiers. Top insiders, I think, for me, and Richard, you can give me your 1 or 2 sentence take on them. I'll rattle a couple off. Chris Christie would be an example.
Doesn't get you anything. And I think Chris Christie carries just as much water.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right.
I mean, the Bridgegate, I mean, the fact that his chief of staff is going to jail, like chief of staff might go to jail.
The fact that he denounced Trump so heavily in the primaries.
And then endorsed him the next day.
And I don't think I don't think New Jersey helps Donald Trump.
And I don't think his wife likes Donald Trump.
which, believe it or not, can be a very important factor.
Who you sleep with is a big deal.
Yeah, okay, what about Carly Fiorina? I think she's...
No, I mean, he said he called her ugly.
She's a dead fish. He did.
He called her
He
ugly.
did. Nikki Haley.
No.
For what reason?
She wouldn't take it.
She wouldn't accept? Okay. Bobby Jindal.
He'd be a good one.
Now, he does...
He hates Donald, but all the things he said about Donald Trump.
I mean, this is a problem with a lot of the people,
His
right?
campaign fell on his sword for Donald Trump. And I think Bobby Jindal would probably by far one of the worst governors in American history. I mean, he's awful. I mean, the people of Louisiana are suffering.
Absolutely.
That's why they elected a Democrat.
Well, let's talk about Mike Pence. Now, I don't know if he's come out and said anything about Donald. I think he's kept his mouth shut.
Indiana Governor Mike Pence. That's an interesting one.
I mean, that is an interesting one. I don't necessarily think that he's someone who has a big target on his back like a lot of these other names.
No, and I think he's a safe pick because he won't lose. I mean, Republicans aren't going to lose the Indiana governor's mansion anytime in the near future.
Yeah.
A safe pick.
It's a safe pick. Is it enough of a value add, I think, is the concern for Trump's camp.
No, I mean, it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't bring a new coalition.
Just another white guy.
It's another white guy. Okay, so a couple more insiders.
White guy from Central Casting.
And then we'll talk about crazy people. Okay, Paul Ryan has been thrown out there for a long time. It's not happening. Marco Rubio.
No.
Marco Rubio didn't even win Florida.
No.
He wouldn't even bring Donald Trump his own state.
No.
That's a bad choice. And let's talk about Scott Walker, and then we'll move over to the other side.
No. Well, Scott Walker's a good pick.
Yeah.
I mean, he's termed out now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, his governorship is over. Scott Walker's a good pick. I mean, Scott, yeah, that's a good, I mean, I don't know if Scott Walker would, I don't know, I can't remember what he said about Donald Trump because his campaign was so short. But Scott Walker would be a good pick.
A star.
Scott Walker, the problem that Scott Walker's going to have is because he's so anti-worker and Donald Trump is trying to go after the blue collar that it could create a little ism and schism on that stuff.
Well, Donald Trump, interestingly, as a billionaire, positions himself as a champion of working class Americans.
Yeah,
and somehow people buy it.
And Scott Walker with no education is sort of crux himself as the Koch brother backed for the rich and wealthy.
Well, I think people are going to have no problem ignoring that once Donald Trump enters the general election. I mean, because he's going to bring in all of that Republican money, right? Like, I mean, this self-funded campaign ends.
But that's not true because the Koch brothers have said that they might sit on the fence this election.
Well,
in the presidential.
They're not the only people that are donating big bucks.
Adelson is going to give.
Yeah. And I think Donald Trump has a lot of billionaire friends that may not necessarily participate in the political process.
Or they'll start a super PAC.
Exactly.